Welcome to the remarkable economic journey of South Africa. A story spanning over 1,500 years, from indigenous subsistence economies to a modern industrial nation. Today, we'll explore how this nation transformed from simple trade networks to a GDP of $380 billion, weathering colonialism, apartheid, and global economic shifts. Before 1652, South Africa's economy began with indigenous populations, the Khoisan hunter-gatherers and Bantu-speaking farmers who migrated southward around 300 to 500 AD. The economy was primarily subsistence-based, relying on hunting, herding cattle, and cultivating crops like sorghum and millet. Trade networks existed, exchanging goods like iron, copper and salt with neighboring regions, but there was no formalized currency or large-scale commerce. By the 15th century, coastal areas saw limited interaction with Portuguese explorers, but the economy remained localized and agrarian. In 1652, the Dutch East India Company established a refreshment station at the Cape of Good Hope, marking the start of European colonization. The economy shifted to export-oriented agriculture, focusing on wheat, wine and livestock to supply passing ships. Slavery was introduced, with enslaved people from Asia and Africa providing labor. By the 1690s, economic output was small, around 100,000 guilders annually. The 18th century saw expansion inland, with trekboers pushing frontiers for grazing land, leading to conflicts with indigenous groups like the Xhosa. The economy diversified into wool, ostrich feathers and wine exports. Slavery intensified, with over 60,000 slaves by century's end. British occupation in 1795 introduced free trade policies, boosting exports. Cape Colony's output reached 1 to 2 million pounds annually by 1800. Under British rule, the abolition of slavery in 1834 shifted labor to wage systems, though still exploitative. The Great Trek of the 1830s saw Boers establish inland republics like the Orange Free State and Transvaal, focusing on subsistence farming. Coastal economies grew with sugar plantations in Natal. By the 1840s, the combined colonies' economic value was around 5 million pounds annually. The discovery of diamonds in Kimberley in 1867 revolutionized the economy, attracting global capital and labor. Migrant labor systems emerged, drawing African workers to mines. By 1870, diamond exports reached 3 million pounds annually. The economy transitioned from agriculture to mining, with rapid growth rates of 5 to 7% as railway infrastructure expanded. Gold discoveries on the Witwatersrand in 1886 turned South Africa into a global mining powerhouse. Johannesburg mushroomed from a camp to a city. Gold production hit 100 tons by 1890, with economic growth averaging 4 to 6% annually. Mining companies like De Beers consolidated control. Total economic output reached 50 million pounds by 1890, employing over 100,000 workers. The Second Anglo-Boer War from 1899 to 1902 devastated farms but led to reconstruction funded by mining taxes. The Union of South Africa formed in 1910, unifying colonies. Gold mining dominated, with output reaching 250 tons annually. Industrialization began with steel and manufacturing. GDP estimates for 1910 reached 150 million pounds, equivalent to $20 to $25 billion today. World War I boosted mining and agriculture exports. The 1913 Natives Land Act restricted black land ownership to just 7% of territory. Post-war manufacturing expanded into textiles and food processing. By 1920, GDP was approximately 300 million pounds nominal. Gold standard adherence stabilized currency. The 1920s saw protectionist tariffs fostering local industry, with GDP reaching 400 million pounds by 1929. The Great Depression hit hard, but gold prices rising after abandoning the gold standard in 1932 aided recovery. World War II stimulated manufacturing of vehicles and munitions. By 1940, GDP was 600 million pounds nominal. Apartheid policies began informally, segregating labor. Post-war GDP hit 1 billion pounds by 1948, with 5 to 6% growth. Formal apartheid in 1948 enforced racial segregation, with cheap black labor fueling growth. Manufacturing overtook mining in GDP contribution. GDP in 1950, $7.5 billion, growing at 4.5% annually. By 1959, $11.5 billion with per capita income of $750. Population reached 15 million. Key exports included gold, coal, and fruits as the economy continued expanding. The 1960s saw economic expansion peak despite international criticism. GDP grew from 12.5 billion in 1960 to 22 billion by 1969. Average annual growth hit 5.5%. State enterprises like Sasol emerged, converting coal to oil. Population reached 20 million. The 1970s brought oil shocks, but gold prices soared. GDP reached 52 billion by 1979, though apartheid resistance grew. The 1980s saw international sanctions cripple growth. GDP averaged only 1.5% growth due to boycotts and reached 100 billion by 1989. Debt crisis hit with 15% inflation. Population grew to 35 million, with per capita income of $2,860. Apartheid ended in 1994. Mandela's government liberalized trade and joined the WTO, though early growth was negative. GDP recovered from 112 billion in 1990 to 136 billion by 1999. Population reached 43 million with per capita income of $3,160. Black economic empowerment policies aimed at redistribution, marking a new chapter in South African economic development. The 2000s brought economic stability under Mbeki and a commodities boom in gold and platinum. GDP grew from 136 billion in 2000 to 285 billion by 2009, with peak growth of 5.6% in 2006. Population reached 49 million with per capita income of $5,820, but the global financial crisis caused a 1.5% contraction in 2009. The 2010s saw the Zuma era bring corruption and state capture. Growth slowed dramatically to an average of 1.5%. Load shedding and power outages hurt industry. GDP stagnated from 375 billion in 2010 to 352 billion by 2019. Population reached 58 million, but unemployment rose to 30%, highlighting growing economic challenges. COVID-19 devastated the economy. GDP contracted 6.3% in 2020 to $335 billion. Recovery brought 4.7% growth in 2021, reaching 419 billion. By 2023, GDP was 378 billion with 0.6% growth. 2024 estimates show 373 billion GDP with 0.9% growth. As of mid-2025, preliminary data shows around 380 billion. Population now stands at 60.6 million, with per capita income of $6,270, representing 0.4% of world GDP. Key challenges remain: inequality with a Gini coefficient of 0.63 and unemployment at 33%. Yet reforms in renewable energy and tourism offer hope for South Africa's economic future. From subsistence economies to a modern industrial nation, South Africa's economic journey continues to evolve, shaped by its complex history and promising future.